20 pence, 20 minutes. That's not really a challenge that I set myself. It's just how it turned out. This Camaro, which I can say is anywhere between a 1977 and a 1982 model, is apparently not made by anybody, and it's quite a cheap and cheerful thing. I found it in a charity shop. I think I paid 20 pence for it. The test that I use when I'm wondering whether to spend my hard-earned 20 pence on an off-brand casting like this is, does it remind me of the real thing? And this one did. I looked at it and I thought, that's a Camaro from late 70s, early 80s, straight away. Now, it's my usual trick, my little party piece of doing something with the wheels without even having to drill it open, but I'm doing it a little bit differently this time. If you notice the O-ring, I'm painting around the inside to create that wheel rim sort of effect while it's still off the car. And the reason for that is I just want the wheel centres to be a different colour than the wheel rim. So I've already painted the wheel rims, as you saw, in like a dark metallic grey. And the O-ring has had its silver edge put around the inside. And then to simulate it being mounted on an axle, I've put it onto the end of some blue tack. It does come off occasionally. You might just have to put it back on again. And then if you wet sand it on some 600 grit, you'll find you get that nice straight wheel rim edge like you do if you do it when it's actually in position on the car or on an axle. And from then on, it's pretty much business as usual. Well, not quite, because while we are going through the usual process of putting the little bit of super glue around the edge of the original wheel and then mounting the O-ring onto the wheel, and then, like I said, this is the bit where you've got to put the most effort and concentration in, because you want to make sure that O-ring is absolutely dead centre. You don't want it to, because we want these wheels to still roll at the end of all this, and we don't want them to roll in an offset manner and look comical. As I said before, it's very important to choose an O-ring. Have a selection of these O-rings so you can choose one that's the right size to go up to just nicely cover the wheel. You don't want one that's bigger than the wheel, because it won't roll and you'll have all sorts of problems in actually building the wheel up then, because you'll have to start. Just don't get into that. And if it's too small, it'll look stupid. So this is where the process differs from in the last video and the other videos several of the videos that I've done of this, showing this method of improving original wheels, is that we've already done the sanding, because we did the sanding before we even mounted the thing before we even mounted the O-ring onto the wheel. I'd already cut out lengths of the heat shrink tube that'll make the tyre, that just kind of wraps it all up and makes it a little bit more neat. And it's, again, same process as before, just measure the width of the original wheel and just add an immeasurably tiny amount just to make a kind of bridge between the edge of the wheel and the O-ring itself. I mean, you can just make it exact. If it's 5mm wide, just cut a piece that's 5mm. It'll be okay. I'm just saying, if you can go a tiny amount, but nothing like a full millimetre over when you're doing it like this, that's not a bad way to do it. And then same procedure as before. It's when you're setting it on fire, you just make sure you put it on in very, very quick bursts like I was doing just there. Any more than that, I've said this before, you'll melt the wheel and you'll melt the base plate, and you don't want to do either of those things. So putting a bit of black detailing on now, I'm just going to cross the whole of where the rear tail light is on the... It's not quite got the same kind of continuous tail light effect that you get with the Firebird, but it's not far off that, because it is blacked in the centre, and then just the lights themselves are just coloured in. The segments of the lights are actually cast into the metal, but they're probably too small for me to be able to do something like leaving the lines in between them as black and then colouring in the tiny little segments, because they'd just be too tiny and they wouldn't really convey the effect of the backlights properly. So, and conveniently, that means you can get this done quicker. So liquid chrome, it doesn't have to be liquid chrome, it can just be silver. I noticed at the front there was a couple of little indentations where some auxiliary lights might be, because this is clearly not quite a standard Camaro. I'm not quite sure. I'm not even 100% sure of the year, because they've got, with the big taillights at the back, it's got to be at least 1978, and obviously it can't be later than 1982 because that's a whole different body. But then at the front they've only got single headlights, and they didn't really have that since the early to mid 70s. They always had smaller lights on the inside. So as you'll see, I do put those on, but at the moment I'm just going over the headlights that are there just with liquid chrome. But again, it doesn't have to be liquid chrome, it can be silver. Same for those spotlight sort of cutouts. And then all I did was the grille. I just gave the grille a bit of a dusting with black, because I'm going to sand that later. and that'll probably bring out the sort of egg crate kind of wire mesh of the grill and hopefully leave the holes inside the grill black. Now, because this is it's not a completely destroyed, kind of worn to death example, but it is quite play worn. Some of the bits like on the edge of the rear spoiler and on the front of the front spoiler as well, where it's chipped along the edge, I've just sanded those to bright metal. Why not? It just looks better than tarnished and chipped metal, because we're not painting this thing, so let's just make little improvements where we can. The tail lights now, again, you don't have to use liquid chrome if you don't want. Silver is just as effective, because when you put the colour on, it does kind of dull the chrome effect anyway. The liquid chrome pen just happens to be there. So I'm just going over what would have been the tail lights, trying to stay within the confines of that black line. I think I do go slightly out of this, but it's amazing what you can do with the simplest of tools. A normal pencil is good just for going over that and just redefining it, because it will, not only will it kind of scrape the chrome away, but it will sort of leave a slight layer of lead there as well, because it is a lead pencil, and you can do the same at the edges, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It's as good and as permanent a solution as anything else, especially when we're going to put transparent paint over it anyway. Now, I did leave that time to dry. I mean, I say that this is 20 minutes. It is 20 minutes. Well, it's less than 20 minutes. I've probably spent quite a lot less than 20 minutes actually working on this thing. But that amount of time, however short it might be, whether it's 10 minutes or whatever, that is spread out over, I think, in reality, I think it was spread out over about an hour and a half. It was just something I could just keep picking up and doing a bit on while doing other things, and then going back to. So it was actually less than 20 minutes in total, but you're probably best advised not to try and just do it all in 20 minutes in one thing, because you've got to leave time for these chrome sort of headlight reflectors and rear light reflectors. You've got to leave time for those to dry. You've got to leave time for the silver paint to dry that I put around the O-rings to make the wheel rims. So there's still a little bit of drying time involved. But overall, I think I started this at 5 o'clock, and by 6:30 it was done. And I hadn't really been. I'd got a lot of other things done in the house during that time. So I would say it's probably closer to 10 minutes of actual work. So this is probably the most important bits are I've said this before, are the taillights, because if you get these wrong, if you colour outside the lines and make a big blobby mess of them, or have them so they're just not coloured in properly, then it almost renders the whole thing pointless, because you're trying to give it a bit of a lift with its new wheels and its details and whatever. If you get those wrong, then you've probably just made it even worse than it is before. So this is probably the bit that you need to spend the most time on, just very, very carefully painting in those lights. I mean, I'm using Tamiya orange for the indicators and then Tamiya red for the outer lights. You don't have to use those if you don't want. I mean, a lot of people don't use transparent colours for lights and indicators, and there's nothing wrong with that. It looks fine. You could just use red and orange nail varnish if you wanted, or if you're doing the silver reflectors, if you're really precise, you could actually use red and orange permanent markers to fill the light details in themselves. I just prefer the Tamiya clear because it just gives you a bit of depth, because it's quite thick but it's still transparent, so it gives you a bit of depth and gives you the sort of impression that there's a real light there. I certainly like to tell myself that anyway. So after this, I had to make my own inner lights, because like I say, it's clearly supposed to be a 78 onwards Camaro, and they did have lights on the inside from 1978 onwards, so I'm just making them myself, because the empty space is there to do it, so just very, very carefully, and just making sure they're symmetrical so they actually line up with each other. And like I say, while that's drying, I can go back to the tail lights now and just get the red put on for the tail lights. Because it's a slightly larger area of red, I decided to use a slightly larger, rather than just using that little pin, because I just wanted to very clearly define those orange indicators. You've got a bit more to work with. You've got a little bit more breathing space with the red, because you can go right to the edge. You're not having to stop and start in between two edges, so, which, if that makes sense, like you do with the orange one. So and it just gets it done a little bit quicker, and because there's no point pointlessly making yourself take forever over something, because that can cause frustration, and that can lead to mistakes in itself. So it's a little bit of a balance really between patience and taking your time with it, and also getting on with it and actually getting it done, because you don't want every single step of everything to take forever. And if you do get a little bit too much on, the pencil's always really good at getting it off, and if it's already dried, the rubber that's on the eraser that's on the other end of the pencil can sort that out usually. So with that done, the extra lights that I've made out of nowhere on the front were just about ready to dab in. So I've done the auxiliary lights, I've done those in orange, in Tamiya orange, and I do the little auxiliary ones on the inside in orange as well. I'm not entirely sure if that's really completely 100% accurate to a real Camaro, but then again, the front end of this isn't completely accurate and 100% to a real Camaro. I mean, the grille is a little bit, the way the grille's kind of pronounced, it's a little bit more like it's the earlier grille, but canted out at the angle of the later ones, so it's not massively accurate anyway. But I always just think Camaros from this era, they need to have some fairly prominent amber lights at the front, so I've kind of got that covered by having 4 of them there, I would have said. So we're nearly done now. The only thing really left to do after this is just to put that little bit of tyre slick around the edge, a little bit of Tamiya clear just on the around the edge of the O-ring to make the tyres look really shiny. With the Rover SD one last week, it was like the kind of thing that you'd do on a brownfield industrial estate second-hand car lot in the 1980s. Obviously, with this being a Camaro, it's unlikely to be there, so it's more like the kind of thing that a car lot like the one in used cars might have done. So imagine Kurt Russell's doing this just before he stitches somebody up with it. So we're coming up to the grand reveal, and bear in mind, apart from the gaps to let things dry, this is pretty much in real time. So the inset window is what we started with, and obviously the main picture is what we've got now. So it's not even been opened up. The paint's still the same, the glass is still the same, everything's still the same. The wheels are even the same wheels, it's just that they've been heavily altered. Yeah, okay, it wasn't a mint example to start with. I mean, you can imagine if you did this with an absolutely mint one, then you might be able to say the results are a little bit better. But either way, does it now look like something that would look quite cool just sat on a shelf somewhere? Yes, I think it does. Did it look like something that would have looked cool on a shelf before? Probably not. Thanks for watching.